Clinical Consultation Network. As you know, we do this every Tuesday at 12:30 Central Time. So I'm so glad today that you could all join us. And we have a return guest, Kimberly Best, who is an RN and also a Master of Arts, and is here with us today to talk to us about conflict resolution. And I don't know if folks will remember, about a month ago, we had Kimberly on with Phil Martin, Dr. Phil Martin, talking about honoring choices and, end of life decisions. And I think I still have displayed your book up here, Kimberly. Do I have it displayed where everybody can see that right now?
Yeah. Yes, you do.
So, if you're wanting to learn more about end of life decisions, that's a great book to read and to get some tips and ideas. But today she's going to talk to us about conflict resolution. And Kim is a Rule 31 listed civil mediator and trained family mediator. She is the owner of Best Conflict Solutions. And so if you got the ad for this, you saw that we had that website for Best Conflict Solutions listed. And she's also focuses on conflict coaching, civil, family, healthcare, and elder mediation. And she's from Franklin. She spent most of her career as a registered nurse in intensive care, trauma, and emergency medicine, where she cared for people in extreme need and gained valuable experience in the medical system. She attended graduate school at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and she was in clinical community psychology. She obtained a master's degree in conflict management from Lipscomb University. And Kim also trained in transformative mediation at Hofstra University, healthcare mediation at the University of South Florida, and is working member of the ACR Elder Mediation Professional Development Group. She also serves on the board of the Tennessee Association of Professional Mediators. She's an active member of Mediators Beyond Borders International. Kim is passionate about helping others resolve conflicts in a productive, non-litigious way and finding the optimal solution for problems for all parties involved. And she also, as I've already pointed out, is the author of How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. And so I have that displayed for you. You can find that book on Amazon, and I highly encourage you to go and check that out. So Kim, welcome today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
And before we launch into getting you to introduce yourself and everything, I'm going, as if I didn't introduce you pretty fully there, you can give us a little bit more and tell us your interesting fact. But I'm going to share one of the articles that you provided to me for our Get Smarticle today. So let me do that real quick, and then we'll launch into your presentation, your introduction and presentation. All right, am I sharing Get Smarticle? You see Don Adams listening to his shoe phone. All right, so today's Get Smarticle is all about, it's by Kim Best, and it's moving forward with conflict resolution. It's an article in Pure Living Nashville. And so I'm just going to hit a few high points here, Kim. I know you'll highlight a lot of these things probably as you're talking today, but as you pointed out, this article was written back in July of 2020. And, it was a time where we were experiencing a lot of conflict. I think we were having a lot of conflicted emotions because of the pandemic and numerous other things that have been going on in our world. But there's been a lot of fear affecting people over the last 18 months. And of course, that fear is at the basis of conflict that we have with others, as you point out in your article. Building resilience in the face of fear is your key topic here. And you talk a lot about self-regulation, the need to take care of yourself, remain present in the moment. Relationship regulation, focusing on listening to others, checking information for truth. We get a lot of information that we really need to vet very carefully these days. Share positive news with others, because it seems like, oh gosh, there's so much negative going on, that when you can share positive news, that helps manage those relationships. And then showing up calm. I thought that was a good phrase that you had in there, Kim, to help us just, really manage ourselves in our relationships with others, and remain calm. And that can be contagious. Then group support is also important. And so this involves community building. So working together to solve problems, essentially, and inspire one another. Key aspects of building this resilience that we're looking for. And, as you pointed out in the article, Kim, as well, this is a time of love and compassion. There's a great need for us to support one another, remain courageous through difficult times, rely on past success in dealing with crisis. And Kim, one of the things I had been thinking a lot about is, when we go back and look in history at things our forefathers have done, that this is really a great lesson to us, and gives us a lot of encouragement, that we can get through difficult times and conflict. Work as a team more. That's important. Giving is also a way to deal with stress. So whenever you give of yourself to others, that it helps you reduce stress. And ask yourself, instead of who is to blame, what are the solutions to the problems we're facing? And finally, I think you make a really important point in your article here, Kim, when you talk about gratitude, because gratitude, thankfulness, is one of the most important aspects of managing your own stress. Because when you're thankful, many studies have shown that you're much less stressed, and you're more capable of engaging in conflict resolution, which is such an important topic. And I'm so glad you're here today to talk to us further about that, Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. My work is done. You just presented for me and you did a great job. And I just want to know if I can have your PowerPoint.
Yes, you can have it, but I am quite sure you're going to be able to build on what I've put out there. Now, I don't want to forget to ask you about your interesting fact, and I know you had to share one with us before when you're on here, but we want to go deeper with facts. So,
Yeah.
is there another fact you can share with us?
Yeah. So last time I talked about how I'd been rejected by the Dr. Phil show. And I was going to build on that, something pretty funny that happened after that. But since then, actually, I have something that I'd like to share that really touched me and was an honor. So, um, the past couple weeks, I just got back this past weekend from Italy, and part of the trip was Rome. And part of the reason for that was my significant other was the former COO of the World Food Program, and they're headquartered in Rome. So we're trying to combine Mediators Beyond Borders, which you mentioned that I'm part of, which is a way to resolve conflict non-litigiously, non-violently, and does international work. So we I had the honor of meeting the deputy director of WFP. And while we were there, he said, well, we're about to have an executive board meeting. Do you all want to sit in on the meeting? And of course, I got to sit in as a tag along, but I was sitting in, the World Food Program is part of the United Nations, and the executive committee is ambassadors from around the world that are ambassadors to Rome itself. And the topic of the discussion was the countries that are in absolute crisis right now, like Afghanistan. And my son has actually served in Afghanistan. He just, lucky for me, got home before it got really bad, but he was actually in combat too. So I had a keen interest in that and the other places that are really in need from a humanitarian standpoint, like Syria and places in Africa. So I got to sit in this room that looked just like it does on TV, the Oval Room with the translators in the background and, headphones on. Of course, most of it was remote. And oh, I might get a little choked up here. Got to listen to the country director in Afghanistan for WFP, who, of all things, is a woman. and she's Irish. And the executive director, or sorry, the deputy director said to us, if there's anybody on the planet that can handle the Taliban, it's this woman. I mean, how ironic is that, right? So I listened to her talk about what they're doing towards feeding people, and you know, the world just gets so much bigger. So I would like to invite you all. Actually, my partner is going to be speaking on WFP and what it does that we don't even know they're doing, and how we participate as Americans that we don't even know what we're doing, as in we feed North Korea. Like we feed the people of North Korea. Like who knows that, right? So he's presenting to something called Will Work for Food, which has been going on since COVID began. A colleague of mine who is a mediator in France started a program that brings excellent speakers from across the world together, to mostly mediators or mediation related, conflict related, to talk about their work and what they know. And Mike is going to present on the World Food Program. And I think I didn't mention, but they won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. So I got to see that standing there. I know it was incredible. It was incredible. So thank you for tolerating me getting emotional. Part of my talk is like emotions are great anyway. So I guess.
Well, that was one of the
Oh,
best interesting facts I think we've ever had. That's
oh,
fantastic. I'm glad you shared that
yeah.
experience over there.
It,
And
remarkable. You feel so little when you're sitting in a big world, you know, and these people's life are literally on the line. I mean, she is not leaving Afghanistan to keep feeding, and she is negotiating with the Taliban. So we think our conflict problems are tough negotiating with our spouses and our ex-spouses. Um, you know, to segue into the conflict, these are just skills, and most of us haven't learned them, you know, and they're life-changing skills to learn how to deal with conflict. So,
well, with all that you've brought to the table, I have no idea why Dr. Phil turned you down.
I was either too crazy or not crazy enough. That's the question.
Well, I'm so glad you're here with us today, and
Thank you.
so glad you're here to share this topic.
Okay. Karen's going to be running this for me, so I'm sorry. I'm going to be a little annoying to say, go ahead and forward the slide. I didn't trust myself to handle the tech on this. Jessie up there is my assistant. She knows, like, don't trust me with tech. So I'm also going to be glancing off to the side, and that's because I'm running this beside me as well, just so that I can check, you know, what the next slide is, because normally I do both. So welcome to Confidence in Conflict. Skills that work. It's the easiest way to talk about it. It is a skill. Go ahead, Karen. Yeah, so I want to take a moment. I got to clear my screen here. I just had a pop up to recognize you all. Because success isn't just what you accomplish, it's what you inspire others to do. And when I spoke to you all last month, um, I looked up what you do, and I saw your mission statement of supporting all Tennesseans with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live the lives they envision for themselves and to become the nation's most person-centered, cost-effective state support system. Support is critical, and what you do is hard work. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize you and hope you recognize yourself. A moment of gratitude for you, and hopefully that you can extend to yourself.
On behalf of the network, I will say thank you for that.
Yeah. So when I say conflict, normally at this point in my talk, people, I ask them what word comes to mind when they hear conflict. So if anybody can unmute or just say, when they hear the word conflict, what do you think?
Tension.
Tension?
Fight.
Fight.
Stress.
What was that?
Stress.
Stress.
Something to avoid.
Something to avoid. Yeah, my goal was to help you love conflict by the end of this. So I get responses like war, everything you all said. It's scary. Conflict is scary, and I propose that conflict is scary because we haven't learned how to do it. But conflict is completely normal. Like it's just part of life, and it's can you do the next slide for me, please, Karen? Yeah. So when I think of conflict, I think of it as a problem to solve. A lot of times it shows up, it means something needs to be done differently. And we'll go into more about it in a little bit. But um, if I can think of conflict as a problem to solve and keep it that way, then I can identify the conflict, right? But unfortunately, what we often do in conflict is we label the person the problem, right? So the conflict becomes really big when it becomes about a person or an entire group of people, a culture, right? So identifying a problem to solve helps make conflict manageable. Go ahead and change it for me, please, Karen. And when we're in conflict, we're standing at a crossroads. And we're standing at a lot of crossroads, actually. We have choices to make in this. And one of them, one of the roads that we can take toward conflict leads toward fear, it leads to confrontation, bitterness, revenge. We can also take a road that leads to reconciliation, to problem solving, to collaboration. But there's also another road that we don't recognize in conflict, and that is a growth road. So we learn more about ourselves, we will learn more about other people. It's an opportunity to transform a problem into something greater. It's an opportunity for peace building. So all of these truths about conflict can supersede our fear of conflict. Go ahead, Karen. So I love how we all respect our different opinions. I don't know if that looks like your family, but next slide, please, Karen.
It actually looked like our clinical services meeting the last time we had. So
Yeah, I thought that was pretty relatable. So our conflict response, I'm going to talk about our conflict response. I'm going to talk a little bit more about conflict, and then I'm going to talk about how we can handle conflict better. And we need to understand why we do what we do, because it's not that we're bad people. It's that a lot of times we're wired that way. So two things influence our conflict response: our biology, and I'll talk about that more, and how we grew up. And that is our childhood experiences, the relationships that we had. But for all of us, we've had different biology. We have different biology, even if we're from the same family. We've had different life experiences. So we all react differently to conflict because of these things. Next slide, please. You know, the one thing I ask people right off the bat when I'm doing this, I say, what happened to you when you were growing up and you were the source of conflict? You know? So were you yelled at? Were you put in timeout? Were you beaten or spanked? The messages we learned growing up gave us our reluctance to face conflict now, right? And they're often how we handle or don't handle conflict because of those. So recently, someone said to me, in my family of origin, my parents used up all the conflict oxygen. So all I did was stuff mine. And when we stuff these things, they're in there simmering and growing, and they come out in other ways too. So, what we experienced when we were the source of conflict is important. How we witnessed conflict with other people in our lives, our birth order mattered. The things that we've learned about fault and blame and power and who's right and who's wrong, those are competition, things that have influenced how we do conflict now. And I want to tell a little story on the nurture end of this because I think I mentioned this last time, but I have 5 kids and I have a set of twins. And I raised the first two, the second two came kind of later. And my ex-husband and I, obviously the word ex means we didn't do so well. So in his family, anger was taboo. and so was conflict. So we couldn't work through the problems that we had. So I had these twins, and I wanted them to be able to learn to work through things. So I came across an article one day, and it suggested this. Instead of separating your kids when they're fighting and arguing, instead of being a judge, which is a terrible idea and never works because we never know what's going on behind the scenes, give your kids an opportunity to settle it themselves. So we had 7 acres, which is a pretty long perimeter to walk. And I told them they had to hold hands when they had conflict, hold hands and walk the entire perimeter. Now, for me, that gave me great joy because I see Bruce laughing. Yes, that was like a parent win for me because it's a way of legally torturing your children. And
Yeah.
and for them, they always came back laughing. Now, they told me as grown-ups that they did that on my behalf, but they didn't. And we never discussed the conflict after. So rather than separating them, my big reason for this was I didn't want my son to be someone who turned away from, I didn't want my daughter to either, from their spouse in conflict. I wanted them to learn to be able to show up, that they weren't going to die or get smaller or no body parts would fall off because they engaged in the hard work that is conflict. And I'll promise you this, if we put the hard work in on the front end, it's so much easier in the long term, like everything else, right? But if we don't work through the hard things on the front end, we build a pile. And that pile is really hard to move. And it's for that that a lot of relationships, we finally say, I can't do it. We've let the pile get too big. And later I'll talk about how we still can work through that, even if the pile seems really big. But learning how to do this on the front end makes all the difference in the world. Next page, please, Karen. So the other thing that we have is our biology that affects how we are in conflict. And there is a neuroticism scale. And when I say neurotic, we all are. That's just how we are. But there is a scale, and the scale goes from really calm and collected to very emotional, like a more emotional, labile person. And we're all on that. And that's a biological, where we are on that is a biological start. It's wired into us. So things like um, our anxiety, our vulnerability, whether or not we're predisposed to depression, our impulse control, how well we can immoderate, our agreeableness, how much compassion we have, conscientiousness. I mean, maybe you have the child who's very detail oriented and the other one who's just, off in the clouds. Those are hardwired traits. And sometimes we think like the person is just being that. And I think if we realize that that's who they are, now we can move with some of these. I'm not suggesting they're fixed, but we have predispositions that are who we are. So sometimes when I'm working with people in conflict, they want someone to be someone other than who they can possibly be. And I say it's very much like expecting a walking person to be able to fly. It's just not in our abilities because of our biology sometimes. Next slide, please.
Kim, just as a
Yeah.
little bit of a follow-up on that, would you say that everybody's dealing with some of these differences? I mean, so in other words, there's nobody who's perfect doing this. It's really a matter of understanding yourself in these circumstances.
Ah, yeah. You're exactly right. And I'm going to elaborate some more on that, but you're 100% right on that. I have a slide coming up that says just that. I swear I'm going to give you like a mediation badge, Bruce,
Hey,
because you're a
we're
natural.
we're kindred spirits. When my kids misbehaved, I made them. I stopped the car, but I'd make them get out and hug. That was
Oh, where they hate that in the
their
moment too, don't
resolution. Of
they?
course, being made to do it may not have been a good modeling scenario, but in any case, that was how I did it. So I'm
I
with.
would probably recommend that you give them a choice, and that might look like you either hug each other or you walk home.
Yeah, yeah. It was kind of like that. Yeah, but
No, I think
good
at
stuff.
least it kept them connected, because
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Oh, they're great friends.
Oh, that's awesome. So a little more on nature, and this is important. Uh, we are a product of our brains. And our brains are hardwired to do, I should let Bruce do this slide for me, but our brains are hardwired to do a lot of things. And one thing it's hardwired to do is react. So when we react, we're not ever coming from a thinking place. And I'm going to talk about triggers next. So I'll just maybe cover them both at the same time in this slide for the sake of time. We think with the front of our brain, and that's when we make our best decisions. Our amygdala is our fight and flight. That is, well, so when someone says to us, "I hate you," or "You're a terrible person," or "I'm done with this relationship," and we look at them and we say, "Now I know how you really feel." I'm here to tell you that that is not what they think. That is what they feel, and that's in the moment. That is a triggered reaction, right? And we want to hold on to that as the truth. And that's the argument we keep having. Well, remember when you said that is a reaction and not a response. So, taking time to calm down our reaction, first, we have to recognize that we reacted. Other people will recognize it often before us. And we're going to say things that we don't mean and shouldn't say in that. So, as we talk later on, maybe more about ways to have grace in letting that go. But eventually, we want to be able to recognize when we're triggered, when we're reacting, a Tyrannosaurus Rex is chasing us and really it's not, versus thinking, versus responding, versus finding our truth and actually speaking that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so along with triggers, um, when we're triggered, we're not responding to what's going on in the moment. We're responding to the past. Right? Because something has already been wired into our brain that it reminds us of something that is scary. And what often happens, even in a smaller trigger, is we tell ourselves a story. We tell ourselves a story about what we believe the other person is thinking, what their motives are, what they're feeling. And let me tell you, there's an infinite number of things that can really be going on with that other person. And the odds of our story being right are slim to none. But we make up a story anyway because our brains are wired to do that for safety's sake, to fill in gaps. So I strongly recommend that we check in on the story. And I use this language, and it's Brene Brown's language for those of you who know who Brene Brown. It is the story I'm telling myself. The story I'm telling myself is that you came home late because you just didn't care that I was having dinner at 5. you know Instead of thinking, oh, he came home late because he just didn't care, right? So it's checking in, but it's taking and owning responsibility for my own story. But we have to be aware of the story we're telling ourselves about the conflict and the other person's role in the conflict. And by the way, when we write these stories, we're always the good guys and they're the bad guys. So and sometimes some of us are always the bad guys and they're the good guys, so we have to fact check our stories on that too. Next slide, please. So you can't talk about triggers without talking about anger. And this is another point. I'd love to know what happened in your family when anger showed. What happened? And you can just think it instead of saying it. But what happens now when you see anger? Is it bad? Because in a lot of families, it's like people think it's really wrong to be angry. But anger is important. Anger is a message, again, like conflict, that there's something going on. And while we don't respond well to angry people, none of us do when they're angry. Anger is just a broad brushstroke word for all of these things that are underneath: grief, disappointment, hunger, guilt, um, feelings being hurt, worry. I mean, there are things underneath the anger that we can feel compassion. It's really easy to feel compassionate for someone overwhelmed. It's harder to feel it when you see them just kind of feeling like they're attacking you. So seeing anger as a symptom of hurt, of discomfort, of pain, helps us deal with an angry person. And I mean, anger just, it's okay. Like it just is. It's a, um, well, I will say one of my favorite mediators, William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, says, speak in anger and you'll make the best speech you'll ever regret. So it's something, to notice in yourself, but it's not something to point a finger at somebody else and blame and say, oh, you're angry. Um, I don't ask people, I don't use a lot of therapists will say, oh, I sense that you're angry. I don't do that because of all the words underneath. The question is, what is going on with you? And what do you need right now? What are you feeling right now? We'll talk a little bit more about that. By the way, I should have said if you want to take a snapshot of any of these slides, you're welcome to. But I can also, Bruce, if you want, send a copy of this over for you to pass out to your people too.
Yeah, if you'll do that, that'd be great. Because I'll tell you, this topic you're discussing right now is so important. We deal with a lot of crisis situations with people with IDD, and oftentimes we're dealing with that surface part of it,
Right.
which basically says, "What are we going to do about your anger or your expression of anger here?" Versus trying to understand what's going on underneath, and that's
A
such a
hundred
key
percent.
aspect of everything we're talking.
My grandkids, my grandsons are 4 and 5, and I was listening to them one time talk about, I feel this and I feel that. And I turned to their parents and I said, don't ever stop your kids from saying how they feel because we've not been allowed to say, this is how I feel. But if we have to start recognizing it and helping other people have the opportunity to recognize it, like conflict, like anger, feelings in general, we're afraid of, and we need our feelings. I mean, our
It,
feelings are us.
they're
I
partially your motivation, but also you have to learn, you have to express them to be able to manage them. And
That's right.
that's, they come
That's
leaking
right.
out other ways if you don't. So
That's
very
exactly right.
important
And
stuff.
what the purpose is to help us identify our needs. And I'm telling you, I'm still working on saying what I need. Like I can recognize that I feel overwhelmed, but the next step is what do I need? And that's the question. Start asking that question. Almost nobody has an answer right off, but if you can get in the habit of doing that, we can ask for what we need, which is another really hard thing to do because we act like we're going to die if somebody says no. But ask for what we need, giving the person opportunity to say yes or no. And then, set it up for a win-win that everybody, gets to win. Okay, next slide, please. So, if anybody can think of more things that drive conflict in us, given all that we know so far about our biology and what growing up has done to us, the things that kind of really elicit conflict for us, the biologically wiring for how we handle it, different emotions, lack of control very often, lack of trust, blame versus responsibility, our family dynamics, poor communication, it's a skill we have to learn. A lot of times it's unrealistic expectations. It's the story we tell ourselves about what should happen. And very often the other person's not clued in to what this story is. So they have no idea what role we're expecting from them. Triggers, of course, unmet needs and cultural differences are all things that influence moments of conflict for us. The next slide, please. This one's this one's for Bruce. So, who is the biggest problem in conflict? It is the person in the mirror. Because of the reasons that I just named, because of our emotional triggers, because of our expectations, it is about recognizing our own role in it and what we can do. So, our tendency is to blame our feelings on someone else. It is to blame what happened on them not doing what they were supposed to do. And this is the point where we keep in mind that they're biologically different, their histories are different, what they were told about conflict is different, their whole worldview, even if you're married to them, is different, right? So asking questions and giving the opportunity to say, what is going on with you now? But mostly, what is going on with me now? An example of that, I had a conflict in my own relationship a couple days ago. And I could feel myself get tense and I could feel myself get irritable. And my partner said, "What did I do wrong?" And I said, "You didn't do anything wrong because you don't get responsibility for my feelings. I'm feeling anxious and I'm feeling triggered and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with me right now. But it's going to be, I feel how I feel because of what's going on with me, not because you did something wrong." So part of learning how to do conflict is empowering because you recognize you don't give the power of how you feel over to someone else. It is yours. And that's the hardest thing of all, because the blame thing means they have to be fixed. And it means we don't have to look in the mirror. And we do have to look in the mirror. Next page, please. And naming our feelings, which we talked about. It's another thing I can send Bruce if you want. I have a list of all the things we can feel. And it's nice to look at because it's hard to identify what's going on with us. There's so many things that it can be going on, and it's never just one thing. So I love to use the language. If I'm feeling angry, I will say to myself, a part of me feels angry. If I feel hurt, a part of me feels hurt, because we're always feeling other things too. We feel warm, we feel hungry, we feel happy that AGT's on tonight. I mean, whatever is, there's always more than one thing going on. So to keep it from feeling overwhelming and too big, I use the a part of me feels when I'm trying to figure that out. Next slide, please. So a little side note, when people are upset and in conflict, they often use never and always. And a lot of people say you should never say never and never say always, but that's not true. um, I want to propose that never and always are signals. Never means it's just not enough for me. You never call me, you never whatever. We get stuck in, oh yes, yes I do. I called you on June 22nd of 1923. Yeah, that hasn't come yet. Whatever. Um, oh, it has actually. um, and the same with always. You always come home late. No, I didn't. I came home on time, at this date. Um, Eliminate those as the conflict. Those are diverters to conflict, but they're also signals. Never means it's just not enough, and always means it's way too much for, I'm overwhelmed with it. I'm just overwhelmed with it. Next page. This is one of the hardest things about conflict, but it's going to be one of the easiest tools to carry as far as making it easier. And that is to hold that there are two truths. Because often in conflict, we're so busy trying to convince the other person that we're right and they're wrong, or down to every last detail, right? And once we can understand that their perception is different for all the reasons we talked about, there are going to be two truths. And it doesn't matter if the other person doesn't see it exactly like you. It's easier to say, I respect your truth as yours, you respect mine as mine, and now let's see what they have in the middle, or what do we need to accomplish with those two truths. But there's always two truths because we are different.
Hey, Kim, just attaching this to another language in the treatment of borderline personality disorder, we talk about dialectical behavior therapy, and that basically this is part of the dilemma that a lot of people with borderline personality disorder have, is not being able to recognize this idea of two truths under any given circumstance. And it really ends up being the major challenge in being able to overcome that.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned personality disorders. So I work with people, in conflict, and almost without fail, I see two good people who are just so hurt that all you see is how they act in their hurt, right? Which is also kind of like uh, personality disorders function. But there are also the cases where they're the people who we can't expect them to do what they're not capable of doing, because sometimes they can't. So we might have to hold that there's two truths if they can't. But I will say that almost 100% of the time, the people who come to me, this person says he's a narcissist, and this person says she's a narcissist. I talk to them separately first, to try to get the temperature down, hear them in a nice, peaceful setting and stuff. And I've always been really interested in the other person, almost always diagnoses the other person. By the way, we're all a bit narcissistic. And the truth is, none of us are as narcissistic, or I guess all of us are so narcissistic when we're hurt, because then it becomes all about us. So it's no wonder they're accusing. And narcissism is on a scale like everything else, and there is a clinical narcissist. Um, and then there's the rest of us who are sliding up and down the scale depending on what's going on with us that day.
It's like all diagnoses. We all feel like we have a little touch of almost all of them. varying
We
points of view.
do.
And
We do. We're
so,
somewhere on
uh,
the spectrum. That's
right.
exactly right. But we don't have the right to diagnose. So when we're diagnosing he's this
Yeah.
and she's that, we're slapping on a convenient label for us. And what we're wanting to do is have a relationship with someone. And once we tell our brain a story, we're telling ourselves a story, it's going to make it really hard to change the lens we see people in. And part of this is seeing people in a lens as a person, not the problem. Oh, they're, you have a problem with your spouse. Oh, they're just this. No, they're not just this. They did this thing that we need to address, right? So it's the separating the people from the problem again. Okay, next page, please. So we're about to talk about some things that we can do. I'm just going to tell real quick on this another story. I can make this sound like it's really easy. It's not. It's trial and error, but it's making an effort to do things differently because the same old isn't working. And we're losing too many relationships that we need to hold on to. And we can do this if we learn how. So, little story, my 19-year-old, when he was about 17, I tuck my kids in every night. So I'm tucking him in one night and I look around, his room's a mess. And I'm like, Trey, this room is a mess. And he's like, what? There's nothing wrong with it. That's a trigger for me, by the way. When my eyes see something that somebody else doesn't see, it's a trigger for me. So I'm like, Ian doing the mom thing and he's Ian doing the teenage thing. And finally, about the point I wanted to take a pillow and smother him, I turn around and walk out of the room. Well, that's avoidance and it's wrong and conflict to turn around and walk away. I mean, what I should say is, listen, I'm feeling triggered. Can we talk about this in an hour? But I didn't. I was like, you're either going to die or I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave. So I walk down the stairs and behind me, I hear this voice say, and you call yourself a conflict manager. And I loved it because it reminded me how hard this can be. But here's the catch. We're going to get it wrong sometimes and we quit then, right? Or someone else gets it wrong and we quit then. We stop at the no. And instead of stopping at the no, instead of seeing it as a wall, if we start seeing it as a door, that is something we can come back to and say, you know what, you were right last night. I did handle that wrong. And I'm going to try to do better next time. You know, we need to come back and revisit these things because we're human. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. Next, please. So I know I've talked a lot. We're running out of time. I want to leave room for questions. So I'm going to give some tips. Um, so using your thinking brain, that means recognizing your triggers, right? So make sure, take a moment and say what you want to be saying. Mostly it's about listening, and I could do a whole talk on listening. But when we listen, especially in conflict, we tend to be listening for what is wrong, or we're not even listening, we're planning what we're going to say next. So I ask people when I'm working with them to listen for what is right, because we can build on that, right? I statements, if you can try not to say, well, you, and say, own how you're feeling, own what you did to get there. And again, that's a pretty long conversation of how to do that and express how the other person was in that. But think in I statements. You don't know what someone is thinking or going to say. I can't tell you how many times I hear that. Well, I'm not going to do it because I know what she'll say. I'm not going to say that because I know what they're thinking. You don't. And when you think that you do, you're in the past. That is how the person reacted to the past. And maybe there's an 80% chance they'll do it again. But in the present, we're robbing somebody of an opportunity to do it differently. If we don't show up asking them, giving them that opportunity to do it differently, and then having that discussion. So recognize when you think you know someone that you are just seeing them in the past, and the best of people is how they are now and moving forward. Right and wrong is one of my my favorite things. A few decades ago, one of my best friends had gotten married, and she's brilliant. And she said, whenever I argue with my husband, I always win because I'm better at with words. And right? And she said, one day I realized that for me to win, I had to make him lose.
Yeah.
And I wanted to love enough that I didn't have to make him lose. So I love that, loving enough that you don't have to be right, so that when you have to be right, you're making someone else wrong. Loving enough that you don't have to win, so that you don't make someone else lose. I love that. Watch the stories you're telling yourself. Is it true? Is it true? And if you, I mean, ask if it's true. That's the only way to find out. And learning how to apologize. If you'll have me back again, I can do a whole nother hour on apology and forgiveness. It's great stuff. It's another skill to learn. Next page, please. Yeah, so well, if it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong, why don't I be right and you be wrong? Okay, so next slide, please. So I'm a mediator, and people ask me how's that different than counseling. It's way different. What I do, pre-litigation, litigation, it doesn't matter how small or how big. I sit in the middle between people's conflicts and help them bring out the best, help them explore options, help them set up win-wins to the degree that they can. We're in a litigation crazy stage in life. Like we want to sue, we want to point fingers and blame, and it's tearing us apart. Like the finger pointing and the blame is tearing us apart. And I think for our society, for our families, for our futures, for ourselves, finding ways to build peace, to bring us back together. Because at the end of the day, I have traveled the world. I've done some mission work and stuff, and it's amazing. We're all people who want the same things. We want security. We want peace. We want to love and be loved. We want respect. Um, and we just haven't developed the tools to do this. So, mediation is a confidential way to help people have conversations to save relationships around whatever the conflict is. It doesn't matter. This is on a corporate level, this is on a country level, this is on a one-on-one level, a way to build peace. Next slide, please. And why we are human after all. I mean, we have brains that make us react. We have brains that are quick to respond, they're quick to label. And then we have our smart part of our brain that helps us stop and slow down and show up as the best version of ourselves. And doing that mitigates for regret. Doing that builds community, it builds relationships. But I like that we're human in that it also means life is an experiment. It just is. Every single moment we're living in, we have never done before. And sometimes we're going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong. And right now we're at a stage where we won't let people be wrong. And so we keep pushing harder, doing the same thing that's not working because we're not allowed to be wrong. So I want to tell you, it's okay to mess up. It is. And it's okay to let other people mess up. That's not the problem. The mess isn't the problem. It's how we fix it that matters. Next slide, please. Yeah, you know, I don't want to say you're not good enough how you are, you should be better. You are enough how you are. You're working hard, and this is inside of us. This better version of ourselves is inside of us. It is who we are. So if we can find a way to bring out these things that we've hidden because we haven't been able to talk about things like emotions and conflict, and be at peace with ourselves and help be at peace with others, even when they're not at their best. Because Dr. Bruce said earlier, all of us are imperfect. It's part of being human. And tolerating that and loving anyway is also part of being human. Next slide, please. So there are two TED Talks that Brene Brown does. One is shame and one is on vulnerability. They're life changers. They're entertaining. They're fun. I highly recommend it. The Dance of Anger is a wonderful book about owning what's going on with you. Why Won't You Apologize is just an incredible book on what a real apology looks like and the power of it in there. So I just threw in some books that you might enjoy that are really just fantastic books if you want to follow up more on conflict. And then the last slide. that's me. Feel free to reach out if you have comments about this presentation. I would love to know, good, bad, or indifferent. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. And help me spread the word that there is a better way other than suing each other or shutting each other out or hating the person next door. There are ways of coming together to work together. And that's all I got.
Well, that was enough.
That was a lot, wasn't it?
It was very good, Kim. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to pause for just a second, see if anybody has any comments or questions out there. There were so many things you were talking about triggers. There were so many things that were triggered for me as you were going through that, because I was thinking back on recent conflicts I've had. You know, I was remembering another great phrase that I've tried to make part of how I operate, which came from Stephen Covey, which is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that has always served me quite well in these circumstances when you're experiencing conflict, because as you said, you don't know what other people are thinking. You don't know what they have in their mind. And we like to think that we do. We get very reactive to different things that we hear. I sometimes will have a programmed response to something, but then when you go back and you start thinking more about it, you understand that that may not have been what the person had on their mind when they said whatever it was they said. And so it's just really, really important to do the things that you've been talking to us about today.
And I think I really have found it's just stuff we haven't learned because it's one of those things like the end of life conversations that it's uncomfortable, eh, just think of the power of being able to do this to some degree, to a better degree. You don't have to do it perfect. I mean, I have a friend who says don't let perfection become the enemy of good. We just do it
Yeah.
better and it makes a difference. Yeah.
You know, another important part of this, I think, for clinicians, professional people out there, a lot of times we think we're not supposed to be wrong. We think we're not supposed to have emotions, I think, a lot of times in the work that we do. And I can tell you back my first experience in this field, I was very naive. And one of the things that I put out there was a data collection sheet where people would write down their emotions when people would have different sorts of behavior problems. And when the administrators at my facility discovered that I was doing this, they were just up in arms because they didn't want anybody to know what feelings people were having during these periods when they may be dealing with something that's quite intense. But it is really important to know yourself in those situations, to be able to identify your emotions, to be able to manage them effectively. And in some sense, a lot of the things that we put out there as policy or the things we do actually make us worse problem solvers as a
That's right.
result.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So yeah, you stimulated two things. Number one, we need our emotions. So I work with attorneys, right? As a mediator, it's an attorney-driven field, and they really, a lot of times, don't like emotions at all. But as you
Yeah.
know, Bruce, without emotions, we can't make decisions. So they've studied stroke patients who have their emotion center, impaired. They can't decide whether to pick up a fork or a spoon. So our emotions are critical. They are our nerve endings for how to navigate life. So stuffing them should not be an option. Being able to say I'm uncomfortable with watching your emotions, or I'm comfortable with my feeling my own emotions, is a first step, right? And then the question is, okay, what is uncomfortable about it? Like I ask people, what's the worst thing that will happen if you feel this, whatever this is? What's the worst thing that can happen? And they can't name it, right? And I'm like, well, your arms and legs fall off. And they're like, no. And I'm like, what will happen? So irrational fear, right? The last thing, because I know we are out of time, I want to gift you all something fun because we talked about what we do wrong and stuff. There is a if you could put this in the chat, Karen, viacharacter.org is a free test that lists your character strengths. I want you all to know what you do well. It is your character strengths, and there's a list of like 26, and it'll rank them for you, but you'll know your top 10. So love of learning is my number one. There's a big surprise after that intro you gave me, right, Bruce? um, Honesty, art, your values are listed in hierarchy of that, and you can look at this and say, this is my strength. Like these are the gifts I have for how to do things like conflict. This is how do I use these gifts to navigate with conflict.
Yeah, that's I think a piece of self-examination everybody needs to do. And so I thank you so much for being here today, Kimberly. This was a great presentation. And in fact, several people have already acknowledged that in our chat box here. Cindy Swafford said, great presentation. Thank you, Kimberly. Danielle Forrester said, thank you so much. This was a great CCN. And Salita Morris commented that I really wish this content could be incorporated into school curriculums as early as possible. It's amazing to wonder how many young people might be diverted from adverse life experiences or addiction if they could master these skills. And
If there's a way for me to be able to help someone do that, let me know. And even for what I talked about, if you all have a venue or yeah, I'm actually not going to charge you to talk about this, but a way that you want me to share this, I'm happy to share this.
well, one thing I hope you're going to do is be a guest on Here Again, because we'd love to hear from you again sometime soon. Um, Michelle was pointing out that we recently started a program called the 10 Start Assessment and Stabilization Teams. We work with people in crisis. And one of the things that we do within the context of building that program is to do a character strength survey so that people can identify what their strengths are, what they can bring to the table, and be able to deal with those types of situations more effectively. So we're on board. And I think people should take you up on your offer there to present this in other venues because it's really, really important stuff.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you all. So anytime you run out of speakers every Tuesday, I'll find something to talk about. I like to talk about the things nobody
to
likes to
find
talk
your
about.
email and your telephone number now so that they can sign you up, because they have to come up with guests every week. So, but this was really great. I appreciate you so much, Kimberly, and I hope you will be a guest with us again. And if you're once you become a 5-timer, we give you a special award, although we haven't really. It was going to be a green jacket at one point, but I don't know. We just, but it will be some recognition at least.
I love a goal.
So,
Thank you so much.
well, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Kimberly, so much. This is a Clinical Consultation Network. We do it every Tuesday at 12:30, so be here. See you next week. Bye-bye.